Alrighty, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. And thank you to Sahar and the Center for Security, Race and Rights for hosting this workshop and just for providing the space for us to be here today. Again, for folks that are just joining in, this session and workshop will be recorded. So this is a Know Your Rights workshop. What that means is I hope to inform activists, students like yourselves who are doing the important work about how to protect yourselves and how to move forward with regard to the law as both a vehicle and as a limit. We offer these workshops to groups across the country. People have generally found it helpful to know exactly what the law is in this area. So thinking and talking about things like free speech and government interrogation, for example. So what I hope to do is give you a picture of what the law is like so that you know how to be your own attorney. Our solidarity movement at Palestine Legal is one that is rooted in the distribution of knowledge and a rejection of traditional legal systems, which require the masses to depend on a few individuals to understand and use the law. And so this presentation seeks to challenge that status quo and offer pointers on how to defend yourself and move forward. But as always, Palestine Legal is always available for assistance. We are a legal advocacy organization dedicated to supporting the grassroots US movement for Palestinian freedom. And this is a picture of our entire team at Palestine Legal. We defend the civil and constitutional rights of people in the US who speak out for Palestinian freedom. And we do that by advising people on legal questions, advocating on their behalf, and by educating people so that you can advocate for yourself. Just a little bit more about Palestine Legal. We were founded in 2012 by our director, Dima Khalidi. We are a staff of 11, and we have 3 offices in Illinois, New York, and California, but we can assist anywhere in the United States. Ideally, in a more personal setting, I would have loved to be able to meet and see you all and do introductions face to face. But I think for now, what we'll do is have everyone sort of drop in the chat. Hopefully everyone has access to the chat. Introductions. So if you could include your name, affiliation, and what your goal is for this workshop. I can start us off. My name is Amal Tabitha. I'm an attorney and the Michael Ratner Justice Fellow at Palestine Legal. I am based in New York City. And my goal for this workshop is to distill information in a way that feels easily digestible and transferable, but more importantly, in a way that empowers you all to continue your activism and great work. So I'm just going to open the chat box here. And give folks a minute. If you all can't access the chat, please let me know. Okay, I don't think you all can access the chat due to the webinar format. That's okay. We can continue. So what are some of the broader goals for today's workshop? One is to alert you to the legal landscape and the ways in which it might intersect with your activism. Secondly, I hope to help you assess risks and learn ways to mitigate them. And lastly, to boost your activism with information, resources, and a reflection of the collective power that you all hold. Wonderful. So Sahar just changed the setting and you should all be able to access the chat now. So if you could all take a minute or two to just introduce yourselves, just to get more comfortable with one another, I would really appreciate it. And I'll wait a minute or two for that. Alrighty, I think I am just going to move on. A few disclaimers before we jump into it. This presentation is not intended to be legal advice. It's meant to provide folks with general information about their rights and with tools to assert themselves when interacting with law enforcement. If you have specific questions about your particular situation, I would ask that you don't share them in this setting, and instead I would encourage you to reach out to us individually. I'll also be providing my email at the end of this session so that you have my contact information. And then lastly, and this will be relevant towards the end of the workshop when we discuss law enforcement interactions, but simply asserting your rights does not mean law enforcement will always respect them. However, knowledge of these rights is still super vital for an informed and strategic response, and invoking them may preserve later legal options. Wonderful. I see some people are introducing themselves in the chat. Please continue to do so. So next, what I'm going to do is take you all through a handful of slides, all of which contain a statement on them. And Sahad, please let me know whether the function to raise your hand is available to the attendees. So feel free to participate if you're comfortable doing so, but you don't have to. And if you'd like, you can just observe. What I'm going to do is read the statements on the slides, and if there are any that resonate with you or relate to you or you've experienced them before, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature. So the first one is, my group has been treated differently by the university. I see 2 hands that are up. The next one is, my group has canceled or changed an event because of the university. Again, I'm seeing several hands come up. I or my group have been falsely accused of anti-Semitism. A lot more hands are coming up for this one. I or my group have been falsely accused of supporting terrorism. Again, a significant number of hands are coming up for this one. My university asked my group to engage in dialogue with anti-Palestinian organizations. Some hands are coming up for this one as well. I'm worried about anti-BDS legislation. Again, a good number of hands for this slide. I or someone I know has been contacted by the police. Some hands are up for this slide as well. I'm worried about surveillance or infiltration. A greater number of hands are coming up for this one. And then lastly, I'm worried about being denied entry into Palestine. Yeah, I'm seeing several hands come up for this slide. Wonderful. Thank you all for doing that with me. As you can see, what you're going through is not unique. It's shared among many other activists like yourselves. And what's going on in your campus is likely going on in other campuses, despite the different organizing spaces. So I hope this activity has demonstrated the unity and collective struggle that you share with other students and with other activists. Some of the key issues that came up, both in the slides that I just went through, but also some of the issues that we're going to be discussing today are laid out in this slide. So things like campus trends, what are the trends that we're seeing as they relate to Palestine advocacy? We're going to discuss First Amendment and free speech. We're going to go a little bit into law enforcement interactions. Some other issues are surveillance, false accusations and fundraising, discrimination, anti-BDS legislation, which we're also going to touch on today, and lastly, civil disobedience. So what are some of the campus trends that we're seeing? These are some of the main ones that we've seen and the most prominent ones. Things like censorship, surveillance and infiltration, disparate treatment or unequal application of laws and procedures, false accusations, bureaucratic barriers, and cyberbullying. What are some of the tools that you all hold and that we all have to fight back? Well, there are things like solidarity and collective action. For example, protests, petitions, strikes, boycotts, and civil disobedience. Another tool is taking control of the narrative. And lastly, invoking our constitutional, our civil, and our human rights. So as we shift into the First Amendment, why do we talk about the First Amendment? Well, we talk about it because suppression against Palestine activists is often tied to the First Amendment right to express and speak on behalf of our cause. And it's really important to note here just how well the First Amendment demonstrates the nature and power of the law, because the law can either be a vehicle or a tool for change, or it can be a sword. And we see that no better exemplified than in First Amendment principles with right-wing Nazi and white supremacists using this as a vehicle to spread racism and hate. Whereas Palestine activists rely heavily on the First Amendment to do our work. So all of this is to say that the law is not static. It's a tool, and it's ultimately up to us how we intend to use it and give power to it. The First Amendment protects the right to freedom of religion and expression from government interference. And this is the key word here, government interference. Just a note that we'll be focusing on freedom of expression. We won't go into detail about free speech principles today. But what I'll do is give some general guidelines that may be useful to give a sense of what the general parameters are and how First Amendment rights are being undermined on campuses. So why did I emphasize government interference? That's because there is a distinction between public universities and private universities. And this distinction is important when talking about the First Amendment because public universities are part of the government as it relates to government interference, whereas private universities are not. So what that means is that public universities are limited in the ways that they can restrict speech and are regulated by the law in different ways than private universities are. So does that mean that private universities are not obligated to extend First Amendment rights to their students? No, of course not. You still have rights at private universities. These rights are captured in other things such as policies, principles, or promises, for example. So what is speech? Obviously things like words, right? This is probably the most significant thing, things that you say. But the First Amendment also covers expressive conduct. So things like wearing a keffiyeh, that's protected. Wearing a message, so wearing a shirt that says right to boycott or free Palestine, these are all political messages that are protected. Holding a sign, passing out leaflets, street theater, so things like a mock checkpoint or a vigil, and lastly, boycotts. Some other things that are protected speech that are not listed here are holding up the middle finger, burning a flag, and also the right not to speak. Like if you don't want to engage in dialogue with an Israeli advocacy group that doesn't share your political principles, your school can't force you to. So what's the key point takeaway here? It's that the government cannot discriminate against speakers based on their views. So the government can have their own opinions, but they can't limit or restrict someone's speech merely because they don't agree with it. So what can the government do? So public actors can't restrict what you say. And just to note that there are some exceptions to the First Amendment. They have been really narrowly construed, and they typically have to do with inciting immediate physical violence to someone. But generally speaking, public actors can't restrict what you say. But what they can do is restrict where, when, or how you say it. So for example, you probably can't host a protest at 12 a.m. in your dorm hallway the night before like finals week. That probably violates some type of dorm building rules. You can't protest and block a fire exit in a movie theater. And there are probably some rules around having your microphone be way too loud during a protest. So this is why it's so important to know your local laws. So not just your local municipalities, but your school rules, dorm rules, because they add protections or add restrictions to your First Amendment rights. So that's why it's really important also to have a relationship with your local attorney or just to do your own research. So what laws apply? These are a source for both our rights and our laws. There are various sets of laws that apply. There's the US Constitution, the supreme law of the land, and that's what gives us our right to free speech, to have privacy, etc. Similarly, federal laws apply across the country, but then there are state constitutions, state laws, and local ordinances. And more locally, wherever you live, your local National Lawyers Guild chapter can help you better understand what added protections or restrictions you have. Which is why it's important to just like have a relationship with like your local NLG chapter, for example, or with an attorney in your area, just to like do your own research and run it by them, or to ask them more specific questions about where you are. So some of the key points to take away as we close out the First Amendment. The First Amendment prohibits government interference with speech. Remember that public universities are an arm of the government, but that doesn't extend to private actors. So while private actors aren't obligated under the First Amendment to protect your free speech, they themselves have developed their own free speech principles, and they're usually similar to First Amendment speech protections. Remember, the government can regulate when, where, or how you speak, but they can't regulate what you say. So they can't restrict speech because it's controversial or uncivil. So what can you do if you feel like your free speech rights have been violated? You can contact your administration. You'll want to document everything, and we'll get into what that could possibly look like in a little bit. You'll want to compare your experiences with other organizations or student groups or clubs to demonstrate different treatment. You'll want to seek community, faculty, and legal support. So again, having and fostering relationships with faculty members or your professors, and also being connected with attorneys in your area. It's really important. You might want to launch a publicity campaign to draw attention to the suppression. And of course, you can always call Palestine Legal. And well, what could we do? we could analyze the facts and walk you through the relevant laws and policies. We can send a legal letter to your administration about the legal violations or the suppression. We can help you navigate communications with the school or contact them on your behalf. We can amplify you and your coalition's demands through our partners. We can connect you with help on public messaging, and we can connect you with other students who've had similar experiences. Well, what should you document in these cases where you believe there has been suppression or violation? You want to document who was involved, when it happened, where it happened, and of course, what happened. So what could that look like? It could be something like a shared Excel sheet, right? That sort of tracks the incidences, the people involved, when it happened, and where it happened, and any supporting documents. You could also post all of your communications on like a shared Google Doc. SJPs have done this and it's been incredibly helpful for them. And it's really important to document. And why do I say that it's so important and why do I keep emphasizing documentation? And I'll do this throughout the whole presentation, is because it is usually microaggressions towards Palestine advocates. They don't seem like anything at the time, but when you sort of step back and take a look at the bigger picture, it shows a trend or a pattern of behavior. So that's why it's so crucial to develop some kind of communications with your SJP or student group in which you keep track and document incidences. Next, we're going to shift into anti-boycott legislation. Well, you might be wondering, Emma, you just said that boycotts are protected speech. So why are we talking about anti-boycott legislation? Through introducing anti-boycott legislation, state legislators essentially are trying to chill you into self-censorship. We have seen several different trends in legislation targeting advocacy for Palestinian rights. This is not covering. We've seen a huge wave of legislative attacks in the last 2 years. State and federal lawmakers have introduced at least 33 legislative measures aimed at silencing, condemning, or punishing advocacy for Palestinian rights. These measures primarily included 2 types of bills. The first being targeting boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS. And the second type of bill being a bill that adopts a distorted definition of anti-Semitism, which is also known as the IRA definition. And what the IRA definition does is it essentially defines all criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. And so because this definition can brand pure political speech and advocacy in support of Palestinian freedom as discriminatory or criminal, these laws could violate the First Amendment. Between 2014 and 2020, we've seen 200 plus bills that were introduced targeting Palestinian rights advocacy. Majority of them have failed. Activists have successfully defeated anti-BDS legislation in several different states. And if you're interested in learning more about these type of bills, we have a legislation page at palestinelegal.org. So keep in mind that none of these anti-BDS laws, or at least I should say, these anti-BDS laws rarely apply to campus BDS. So they rarely take away your right to boycott Israel or to advocate for BDS. So what are these bills actually doing? Well, like I said, it's all about that chill. These laws are designed to chill you into self-censorship so that you are fearful to engage or launch a BDS divestment on campus. When in actual reality, they have very narrow applicability, and they're usually limited to prohibiting state governments from entering into big contracts worth like $100,000 plus with entities that support boycott. So that doesn't apply to students in most cases. And state BDS laws should have no applicability to student divestment initiatives. But Israel advocates like to claim that BDS is illegal to try to scare people. That is untrue. You shouldn't believe them. And you should always contact PAL Legal if someone tells you that engaging in BDS is illegal or you'll be penalized for doing so. Again, just reiterating that BDS is protected First Amendment speech. In 1982, the Supreme Court held that boycotts that seek to bring about political change are protected by the First Amendment. So how could Palestine Legal support you in this area? On the legal side of things, we can answer questions about your state's anti-BDS law or on your school's rules and procedures. We can review divestment bills for legal concerns, and we can advise you on disciplinary issues, discriminatory treatment, threats, harassment, or doxing. On the advocacy side, we can connect you to local or national partners for additional support. We can connect you with other students who have navigated similar campaigns. And lastly, on the media side, we can connect you with resources on public messaging, review your statements for legal concerns, and share your statements with partner organizations. I also just want to remind folks that there is a Q&A function in which you can enter any questions that you might have. I'd encourage you to enter them as throughout the presentation, and we'll dedicate some time at the end of the workshop to address them. We're going to shift now into civil disobedience. So what is civil disobedience? Civil disobedience is when you are breaking the law to make a political point, either because the law is unjust or because the law is not important and breaking it will help get your message across. With civil disobedience, typically you're only breaking minor laws, you're aware that you're breaking the law and could face arrest, and you are doing something to disrupt the free flow of commerce because you're trying to make a political point that something is an emergency and cannot go on. So we obviously cannot provide you advice on how to do civil disobedience, but we can provide information about the consequences of carrying out civil disobedience and give you some pointers. The first being is you should recruit legal observers and contact your NLG chapter before engaging in civil disobedience. If you're risking arrest, you should know the NLG hotline. You can usually write it on your arm with a Sharpie, or know at least which criminal defense attorney you plan to call. Next, this workshop is certainly not enough as it relates to civil disobedience. If you're going to engage in civil disobedience, you should talk to a lawyer in advance to know what laws you might be breaking and what the potential consequences are. So you'll want to be informed of your rights and you'll want to know the rules. You may also want to think of things like, do you want to have your phone on you at a protest, for example, if you're engaging in civil disobedience? Do you need necessary medication with you, etc.? So it's just really important to kind of do a one-on-one consultation with an attorney beforehand. And then I'll also just note that knowing the law is really important because different states have different laws. So for example, a New Jersey criminal statute makes it a crime to prevent or disrupt a lawful meeting or gathering by obstructing or interfering with it physically. So this could be relevant, for example, if counter-protesting an event, for example, or thinking about disrupting a meeting of some type. And lastly, you'll want to be aware of power dynamics. So police respond differently to people of color and undocumented folks. And there are other people who are vulnerable, such as people with previous criminal records and people with medical issues. So people facing arrest should know their basic rights when it comes to the police. And we'll get into that in a few slides when we talk about interactions with law enforcement. So again, what can you do? Like I mentioned, you should call your local NOG chapter beforehand. You can recruit legal observers. You'll want to know your schools or cities or local policies. You'll want to look out for differential treatment. You'll want to document everything. and also build relationships with faculty. What are some things that Palestine Legal can do? Again, like I mentioned, we can help you understand the local laws or school policies that apply to your situation. We can help you get in touch with your local NLG or a criminal defense attorney. We can represent you in student disciplinary proceedings if needed, and we can help you with public messaging. Lastly, or second to lastly, we're going to be touching upon your rights during FBI and law enforcement interactions. We do this not to scare you and not because it's so rampant, but because it's happened enough for us to note it and bring it up. Also, it's just generally important to know as our state increases police forces and presence. So what should you do if police come knocking at your door? You should not speak to them without a lawyer. And throughout these slides, I'm also going to be giving examples of how your rights can be communicated, just to sort of make it more easy to sort of think of this in a realistic kind of situation. So I'll give what I call like magic words. So this, for example, can be communicated by saying, I would not like to speak. Please give me your contact card and my attorney will reach out to you. Even if you don't have an attorney, it's good to say this and contact an attorney afterwards. What should you do if police come knocking at your door and want to come in? You should not invite them in. Why? Well, if you open the door and invite police in, you are essentially consenting to a search of your home. So whatever's in their arm's reach, they can search. If it turns out that you open the door before you find out who it is and you realize it's the cops, you can simply just step outside your home, close the door behind you and speak to them from there, or just communicate that you will not speak to them from there. If they come knocking on your door and want to come in, you'll want to ask them for a warrant. Even if they're just trying to chat or do friendly neighborhood check-ins, you don't want to invite them in. If they don't have a warrant, you'll want to say, give me your card and I'll have my attorney contact you. If they do have a warrant, you should ask to see it, and you'll want to look for things like the date, address, and a judge's signature, and what they're authorized to search for. So you can obstruct a search if they have a valid warrant, but you should still watch to see what they're searching and what they're seizing. It's also important to note that if you live with other people or if you have roommates, you should let them know just in case they could be home when this happens and can invite them in. Lastly, and probably most importantly, it is a crime to lie to police. They can lie to you, but you cannot lie to them. So do not lie. And this is easier to do if you simply don't speak to them. So we just spoke about what you should do if police come to your home. Well, what should you do if police approach you on the street? And there are three different categories of interactions, known as a consensual encounter, detention, and arrest. The first type of interaction is a consensual encounter. So what is a consensual encounter? What it is when a cop comes up to you and says, hey, how are you? What's your name? What are you doing here? And is striking up seemingly friendly conversation. Your rights here are that you don't have to answer any of their questions. Depending on the state in which you're in, you may or may not have to tell them your name or show your ID. I believe in New Jersey, they cannot request your name or ID unless they're conducting an investigation or giving a summons. And you are free to leave at any time in this type of encounter. So here your magic words are going to be, I don't want to answer any questions. Am I free to leave? Now, what if you're not free to leave? So a detention is a brief stop, limited in time and space. A cop can only detain you if they have reasonable suspicion that a crime was committed and that you are the person that committed the crime. So for example, if a cop gets a phone call from a manager of a Walgreens that a woman on the corner of 5th and 7th just walked out with a bunch of cards and Snickers, and she's wearing glasses. And the cop comes 5 minutes later and sees a woman with glasses with what looks like birthday cards in her hand and a Snickers sitting on the sidewalk. That's what is considered reasonable suspicion. And a cop can detain you in that case if they believe that you are the person that committed that crime. Even in these cases, you have the right to know if you're being detained, and if you are, you have the right to know why. So if you don't know if you're free to leave, you can simply ask, am I being detained? If the answer is yes, you must stay. And if the answer is no, you can walk away. The last type of interaction that we'll discuss is an arrest. You're arrested if a cop takes you into custody or begins writing you a ticket, and that's considered a non-custodial arrest. And a police officer needs probable cause that you committed a crime in order to arrest you. Your rights in these situations are that police cannot question you unless they have read you your rights, including the right to remain silent. And again, here, taking us all the way back to the first slide of this topic, you're going to want to stay silent. And here you can say, I'm going to remain silent. I would like to speak to an attorney. If you're subject to a custodial arrest, so like if you're taken into custody, your body and your stuff can be searched. But if you're not taken into custody and you're written a ticket, for example, the cops cannot search your body or your stuff without your consent. And you can probably guess what I'm going to say here. You do not want to give consent. So again, just summarizing the different magic words during police interactions. Am I being detained? Am I free to leave? I do not consent to a search. I would like to remain silent. I would like to speak to an attorney. Again, these are the magic words and you must be vocal in these encounters. Staying silent will not do it. And it's really important to say the words, I do not consent. And it's good to say it over and over if you have to, especially in front of a witness, because even if the cops search you anyways, it can help you later in your defense if you are searched unlawfully. And when you say, I'm going to remain silent, the cops are supposed to stop talking to you after you say this. They may not, but you can say it over and over again, even if it seems robotic. So again, what can you do? You can memorize the magic words. You will not want to talk without a lawyer present. You'll want to be mindful of the gap between your rights and the realities of racialized policing. And again, you'll want to document everything. So what can Palestine Legal do? We can counsel you based on your rights, and we can also get you in touch with a criminal defense attorney or your local NLG chapter. How should you document after an encounter with the police? You can write it down. Sometimes I've seen folks type a summary of their encounter on the Notes app on their phone. You can send an email to yourself or to a friend. You can start a Google Doc or Excel chart and share it with others. You can take pictures and videos where it's safe to do so. And again, you can get a legal observer. Lastly, I just want to touch briefly on online security, simply because one of the major trends that we see with Palestine activists, in addition to suppression and self-censorship, is online doxing, blacklisting, and cyberbullying. So this is outside the scope of Know Your Rights, but some information can keep your communication safe, such as being smart about what you post online. So assume everything is public. Use an off-campus email when communicating with other students or activists or attorneys. Use end-to-end encryption, so apps like Signal are really great. And be mindful about what you share online. So one other thing that's important to know is that a lot of us are starting on the internet at a really young age. And whatever we say and do at that young age stays on the internet. So it's really good to frequently do digital hygiene routines where you Google your name and see what comes up and see if there are things that don't represent you or how you feel anymore. Because it's best to go back and kind of delete those. And the point of this is that you'll want to make sure that whatever's being represented about you on the internet is authentically you. So we have some resources. We can't cover everything in a Know Your Rights workshop, but we typically recommend activists and like SJP students, for example, to review resources, and that'll sort of help with like online security and digital hygiene routines. I'll be sure to post those links in the chat box after. And then lastly, if you have specific concerns about cyberbullying, like if you have a Canary Mission profile, for example, or other sites that might blacklist and dox you, I would encourage you to contact us for a one-on-one counseling session. But in the meantime, some things that are good to do, I think, is use positive online content and search engine optimization to bury negative content. So for example, your university could publish something about you or highlighting your work. And that's something that's positive that could help bury negative content like a Canary Mission profile, for example. And then lastly, as always, I would encourage you all to contact us. That's our website. You can contact us via a form on our website. That's also our Twitter and Instagram handle, but I'll also be providing my personal email so that you all can reach out for any counseling or one-on-one questions. And that is the end of